The fluorescent lights of the 42nd floor conference room cast harsh shadows across the polished mahogany table as I shuffled my presentation materials one final time. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's skyline stretched endlessly, the morning sun glinting off glass and steel towers that housed dreams, ambitions, and countless stories of corporate warfare, just like the one I was about to experience. My name is Sarah Chin, and at 38, I thought I'd seen every flavor of workplace humiliation that Meridian Strategic Consulting had to offer. I'd spent the last 8 years climbing the ranks in this cutthroat firm, working 16-hour days, sacrificing weekends, and watching younger, less experienced colleagues leap over me on the corporate ladder. But nothing had prepared me for what was about to unfold in conference room C that Tuesday morning in October. The client was Dataflow Industries, a mid-sized logistics company looking to revolutionize their supply chain management. The contract was worth $2.3 million over 18 months, the kind of deal that could make careers. 3 of us had been selected to present our strategic approaches to their executive team, and I'd spent the past 3 weeks crafting what I believed was a game-changing proposal. Vice President Marcus Whitfield strode into the room with his characteristic swagger, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. At 52, Marcus embodied everything I'd come to despise about corporate leadership. Tall, silver-haired, with a smile that never quite reached his calculating gray eyes. He'd joined Meridian 6 months ago from a competitor, and since then, he'd made it his mission to reshape the consulting division according to his vision of efficiency and profitability. "Good morning, team," Marcus announced, settling into the head chair like a king claiming his throne. "I trust everyone's ready to impress our friends from Dataflow." Around the table sat my 2 competitors, James Morrison, 34, Harvard MBA, Marcus's golden boy who'd somehow managed to secure 3 major accounts in his 2 years at the firm. His proposal lay before him, bound in expensive leather with the Meridian logo embossed in gold. Then there was Rebecca Santos, 29, sharp as a razor, with an uncanny ability to read clients and tailor her presentations to their exact desires. Her materials were organized with military precision, color-coded tabs marking each section. And then there was me. My proposal sat in a simple black binder, the result of countless hours of research, analysis, and strategic thinking. I'd identified inefficiencies in Dataflow's current system that my competitors had completely missed. My approach wasn't just about optimization. It was about transformation. I developed a framework that could reduce their operational costs by 30% while improving delivery times by 25%. The numbers were solid, the methodology was innovative, and I knew it was the best work I'd ever produced. The Dataflow executives arrived at precisely 9 o'clock. CEO Patricia Hendricks, a woman in her mid-50s with steel-gray hair and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. CFO Michael Torres, younger, nervous energy radiating from his precise movements. And COO Jennifer Walsh, somewhere in her 40s, with the bearing of someone who'd fought her way up from the warehouse floor to the executive suite. Marcus stood to welcome them, his charm turned up to maximum wattage. "Patricia, Michael, Jennifer, welcome to Meridian. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to partner with Dataflow on this exciting initiative." The pleasantries continued for several minutes, the kind of corporate small talk that fills time while everyone assesses everyone else. I watched Patricia Hendricks carefully. She struck me as someone who valued substance over style, the kind of leader who'd appreciate the depth of analysis in my proposal rather than flashy presentations. "Shall we begin?" Marcus asked, settling back into his chair. "We have 3 exceptional strategists who've developed comprehensive approaches to your supply chain optimization challenge. James, would you like to start us off?" James launched into his presentation with practiced confidence. His slides were beautiful, his delivery polished, his recommendations safe. He proposed incremental improvements, proven methodologies, the kind of approach that would yield modest results without rocking the boat. I watched the data flow executive's faces as he spoke. Polite attention, occasional nods, but no spark of genuine interest. Rebecca followed with her characteristic precision. Her analysis was thorough, her recommendations more aggressive than James's. She'd clearly done her homework on Dataflow's industry position and competitive challenges. The executives leaned forward slightly as she outlined her timeline and expected outcomes. Better reception, but still no sign of the excitement that comes with a truly innovative solution. Then it was my turn. I stood, my heart hammering against my ribs, and moved to the presentation screen. Patricia, Michael, Jennifer, thank you for this opportunity. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you a question. When you look at your supply chain, what keeps you awake at night? Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. This wasn't how consultants typically began their pitches. The unpredictability, she said after a moment. We can optimize routes, negotiate better rates with carriers, streamline our warehouse operations, but we're still at the mercy of factors we can't control. Weather, traffic, mechanical failures, labor issues. It's like trying to build a house on quicksand. I nodded. That's exactly what I thought you'd say. Because traditional supply chain optimization treats symptoms, not causes. It assumes that unpredictability is just a cost of doing business. My proposal challenges that assumption entirely. I clicked to my first slide. Instead of the typical corporate template, I'd created a visual representation of Dataflow's current supply chain that looked like a spider web with multiple breakpoints highlighted in red. This is your current system. 37 critical failure points, each one capable of cascading disruptions throughout your entire operation. Michael Torres leaned forward in his chair. How did you identify all those points? Our own internal analysis only flagged 12 major vulnerabilities. Because I didn't just look at your system in isolation, I replied, clicking to the next slide. I mapped your supply chain against real-time data from your suppliers, your competitors, your carriers, and even municipal infrastructure projects in your primary service areas. The pattern that emerged tells a story that traditional analysis misses entirely. I could see I had their attention now. Even Marcus, who'd been checking his phone intermittently during the other presentations, was focused on my screen. Here's the breakthrough, I continued, my confidence building with each slide. Instead of trying to optimize a fundamentally flawed system, we rebuild it from the ground up using what I call adaptive resilience architecture. Rather than creating a supply chain that works efficiently under ideal conditions, we create one that actually performs better when things go wrong. Jennifer Walsh spoke up for the first time. That sounds impossible. How can disruption improve performance? This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the core of my entire proposal. By treating disruption as information rather than interference, every traffic delay, every weather pattern, every carrier issue tells us something about the optimal flow of goods through your network. My system captures that information in real time and automatically reconfigures your logistics to take advantage of what other companies see as obstacles. I spent the next 20 minutes walking them through the technical details, the implementation timeline, the projected outcomes. The room was completely silent except for my voice and the occasional scratch of pen on paper as the executives took notes. When I finished with my cost-benefit analysis, showing how the system would pay for itself within 8 months while delivering ongoing savings of $1.2 million annually, Patricia Hendricks sat back in her chair with a slight smile. That's certainly the most innovative approach we've heard, she said. I have to admit, I'm intrigued. How soon could you begin implementation? Before I could answer, Marcus cleared his throat loudly. The sound cut through the room like a knife, and suddenly all eyes were on him instead of me. Well, he said, his tone carrying a dismissive edge that made my stomach clench. That was certainly creative, Sarah. But I think we need to be realistic about what data flow actually needs here. The air in the room shifted. I could feel the momentum I'd built beginning to slip away as Marcus stood and moved to the front of the room, positioning himself between me and the client. "Patricia, Michael, Jennifer," he continued, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he reserved for moments when he wanted to demonstrate his leadership. "You came to Meridian because you trust our expertise and our track record of delivering results. What you've just heard from Sarah is certainly imaginative, but imagination doesn't always translate into practical solutions." My face burned with embarrassment and anger. I opened my mouth to respond, but Marcus held up a hand to silence me. "Don't waste our time with your ideas," he barked, not even bothering to look at me. "These executives are here for proven strategies, not experimental theories that might work in some perfect world scenario." The words hit me like a physical blow. 8 years of dedication to this company, countless successful projects, and he was dismissing me like an intern who'd overstepped her bounds. I looked at the data flow executives, expecting to see them nodding in agreement with Marcus's assessment. Instead, I saw something that surprised me. Patricia Hendricks looked annoyed, not at me, but at Marcus. "With all due respect," Patricia said, her voice cool and professional, "we're perfectly capable of evaluating the merits of each proposal ourselves. We didn't come here to have our options filtered for us." Marcus's confident smile faltered slightly, but he pressed on. Of course. I simply want to ensure that we're presenting you with solutions that our firm can stand behind with complete confidence. James's approach, for instance, is based on methodologies we've successfully implemented across dozens of similar engagements." "Similar," Jennifer Walsh repeated, and there was something in her tone that made the word sound like an insult. "That's exactly what we're trying to avoid. Similar solutions that produce similar results. We're not looking to be like everyone else in our industry." The tension in the room was palpable now. Marcus had clearly miscalculated, assuming that his position as VP would automatically lend weight to his opinion. But these weren't junior managers who could be intimidated by corporate hierarchy. They were seasoned executives who'd reached their positions by making smart decisions, not by deferring to others' judgments. "Perhaps," Michael Torres said diplomatically, "we could take a brief recess to discuss what we've heard. Give us 15 minutes to huddle, and then we can continue with any follow-up questions." Marcus nodded eagerly, seeing this as an opportunity to salvage the situation. "Absolutely. Take all the time you need. Sarah, James, Rebecca, let's give our guests some privacy." As we filed out of the conference room, I felt like I was walking through fog. The humiliation of being dressed down in front of a client was overwhelming, but underneath the embarrassment was something else, a burning conviction that my proposal was exactly what Dataflow needed, regardless of what Marcus thought. In the hallway outside the conference room, James avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with what he'd witnessed. Rebecca shot me a sympathetic look, but said nothing. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the damage he'd caused. "Sarah," he said, pulling me aside as the others dispersed, "I hope you understand that what happened in there was necessary. Sometimes we need to make tough decisions in the moment to protect the client relationship." I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. Protect the client relationship? Marcus, they were interested. They were asking implementation questions. He waved dismissively. They were being polite. "Trust me, I've been doing this a lot longer than you have. I know how to read a room." Before I could respond, the conference room door opened and Michael Torres stepped out. "We're ready to continue," he announced. We filed back in, and I immediately noticed that something had changed in the Dataflow executive's demeanor. They looked more focused, more decisive. Patricia Hendricks was leaning forward in her chair, her hands folded on the table in front of her. "We've discussed your presentations," she began, her gaze moving from James to Rebecca to me before finally settling on Marcus. "And we've reached a decision." Marcus straightened in his chair, his confident smile returning. "Excellent. I'm sure you'll find that our recommendation aligns perfectly with your needs. Patricia's expression remained neutral. Actually, there's been a change in our requirements. We've decided that this project requires a more hands-on approach than we initially outlined. We want to work directly with the strategist who'll be leading the implementation, not through intermediary management layers. I felt my pulse quicken. Where was she going with this? Furthermore, she continued, we've concluded that transformative challenges require transformative solutions. Playing it safe isn't going to give us the competitive advantage we're seeking. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. I completely agree. Conservative approaches rarely yield breakthrough results. That's why I'm confident that James's proposal offers the perfect balance of innovation and proven methodology. Patricia looked at him for a long moment, then turned her attention to me. Ms. Chin, we have some additional questions about your adaptive resilience architecture. Specifically, we'd like to understand your implementation timeline in more detail. The next hour passed in a blur of technical discussions, budget reviews, and strategic planning conversations. The data flow executives peppered me with questions about every aspect of my proposal, diving deep into methodologies, risk mitigation strategies, and expected outcomes. I answered each query with growing confidence, my earlier embarrassment transforming into focused determination. Marcus tried repeatedly to insert himself into the conversation, offering commentary and attempting to steer the discussion toward more conservative alternatives. But each time he spoke, the data flow executives politely but firmly redirected their attention back to me. Finally, Patricia Hendricks stood up. Thank you all for your time today. This has been very illuminating. She shook hands with James and Rebecca, offering polite compliments on their presentations. When she reached Marcus, her smile was professional but cool. Thank you for arranging today's meeting. Then she turned to me, and her expression warmed considerably. Ms. Chin, excellent work. Truly innovative thinking. As the data flow executives gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Patricia approached me one final time. Sarah, may I ask you something? Of course. How long have you been working on supply chain optimization? About 6 years specifically, but I've been in strategic consulting for 8 years total. She nodded thoughtfully. It shows. That level of insight doesn't come from textbooks or case studies. It comes from understanding how systems really work in the real world. After they left, the conference room felt eerily quiet. Marcus was already on his phone, probably reporting to senior management about the meeting's outcome. James and Rebecca packed up their materials with the resigned efficiency of people who knew they hadn't won but weren't particularly surprised by the result. I stood at the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, trying to process what had just happened. The humiliation of Marcus's dismissal still stung, but it was overshadowed by something else. The intoxicating possibility that my work had genuinely impressed people who knew what they were talking about. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Chin, this is Patricia Hendricks. Please call me at your earliest convenience. We have a proposal to discuss. I stared at the text message for a full 30 seconds before the reality of it sank in. Patricia Hendricks wanted to talk to me directly, not through Marcus, not through Meridian's account management process, but personally. My hands trembled slightly as I saved her number to my contacts. The rest of that Tuesday passed in a surreal haze. I tried to focus on my other projects, but every few minutes I found myself glancing at my phone, wondering when to call Patricia back. Too soon might seem desperate. Too late might suggest I wasn't prioritizing their potential business. The corporate dance of timing and perception that I'd learned to navigate over 8 years suddenly felt impossibly complex. At 4:30 p.m., I finally decided I'd waited long enough. I found an empty conference room on the 39th floor, away from the bustling energy of the consulting division, and dialed Patricia's number. She answered on the second ring. Patricia Hendricks. Ms. Hendricks, this is Sarah Chun from Meridian. You asked me to call. Sarah, thank you for getting back to me so quickly. I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly, but after today's presentation, I felt it was important that we have a conversation without intermediaries. My stomach tightened. In my experience, when clients wanted to talk without intermediaries, it usually meant they were about to deliver bad news and wanted to soften the blow with personal attention. Of course, I managed. What can I help you with? Let me be direct, Patricia said. Your proposal is exactly what Dataflow needs. The analysis was thorough, the methodology was innovative, and the projected outcomes align perfectly with our strategic objectives. We want to move forward with your adaptive resilience architecture. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. You do. We do. However, we have some concerns about the implementation structure. Specifically, we're not comfortable with the traditional consulting model where the person who develops the strategy hands it off to junior associates for execution. This project is too important for that kind of fragmented approach. I gripped the phone tighter. What are you suggesting? We want you to lead the implementation personally. Direct engagement, hands-on management, regular face-to-face meetings with our executive team. Think of it as a hybrid consulting contractor arrangement. You'd maintain your relationship with Meridian for administrative purposes, but you'd function as our embedded strategic partner for the 18-month project duration. The implications hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a consulting contract. It was a career-defining opportunity, the kind of high-visibility, high-impact project that transformed consultants into industry leaders. That sounds incredible, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. But I should mention that this decision would ultimately need to be approved by our VP, Marcus Whitfield. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Patricia spoke again, her tone had shifted subtly. About Mr. Whitfield. Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you. His behavior in today's meeting was unprofessional and counterproductive. We understand that internal politics are a reality in any organization, but we won't tolerate having our strategic decisions filtered through someone who clearly doesn't understand the innovative approach we're seeking. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'm not sure I understand. We're prepared to make this arrangement work, but it needs to be structured in a way that gives you direct authority over the project. No interference, no second-guessing, no micromanagement from people who don't grasp the technical complexities involved. I stared out the conference room window at the darkening sky, watching office lights flicker on in buildings across Manhattan. This was the opportunity I'd been working toward for 8 years, but it came with a level of political risk that could end my career at Meridian if it went wrong. Patricia, I appreciate your confidence in me more than I can express. Let me discuss the structural requirements with my management team and get back to you with a framework that works for everyone. Fair enough. But Sarah, I want you to know that we're serious about this. We're not shopping this around to other firms. We're not looking for alternative approaches. We want your solution implemented by you, or we'll look elsewhere entirely. After we hung up, I sat in the empty conference room for nearly an hour, trying to process what had just happened. The biggest opportunity of my career was sitting in front of me, but claiming it would require navigating corporate politics with a precision I'd never attempted before. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Marcus. Sarah, need to see you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. We need to debrief today's presentation. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that makes New York feel alive with possibility. I arrived at the office early, using the extra time to prepare for what I knew would be a delicate conversation with Marcus. I'd spent most of the previous evening researching precedents for the kind of arrangement Patricia had proposed, looking for examples that might make the structure seem less unusual. Marcus's corner office was a shrine to corporate achievement. Mahogany furniture, diplomas and awards covering one wall. A view of Central Park that probably cost the firm an extra $50,000 annually in rent. He was on the phone when I arrived, gesturing animatedly while discussing what sounded like a client retention issue. "Sarah, come in," he said, hanging up and gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you." He settled back in his chair, studying me with the calculating expression I'd learned to recognize as his prelude to difficult conversations. "Yesterday was interesting," he began. "Not exactly how I expected things to unfold." "No," I agreed carefully. "It wasn't. The data flow executives seemed unusually engaged with your presentation, more than I would have expected, given the experimental nature of your approach." I chose my words carefully. They appeared to appreciate the comprehensive analysis and innovative methodology. Marcus leaned forward. "Sarah, I want you to understand something. In this business, client enthusiasm during presentations doesn't always translate into signed contracts. Clients get excited about bold ideas, but when it comes time to write checks, they usually opt for proven solutions." "I understand that." "Good, because I'd hate for you to get your hopes up based on their reaction yesterday. The reality is that James's proposal is much more likely to win this engagement. His approach is solid, implementable, and based on methodologies we've successfully deployed dozens of times." I felt my carefully prepared diplomatic approach beginning to crumble. "Marcus, with respect, I think you might be underestimating their commitment to innovation. They specifically mentioned that they weren't interested in similar solutions that produce similar results." His expression hardened slightly. "Sarah, I've been managing client relationships since before you graduated from college. I know how to read these situations. Trust me on this." This was the moment of truth. I could nod politely, accept his assessment, and watch the opportunity slip away. Or I could take the risk that might define the rest of my career. "Actually, Marcus, there's something I need to tell you. Patricia Hendricks called me yesterday afternoon." His eyebrows rose. "Called you? About what?" "They want to move forward with my proposal. Specifically, they want me to lead the implementation personally, with direct authority over the project." The silence that followed stretched for what felt like minutes. Marcus's expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and finally suspicion. "They called you directly?" "Without going through proper channels. They felt it was important to discuss the implementation structure before formalizing their decision." Marcus stood up and walked to his window, his back to me. "Sarah, this is highly irregular. Clients don't typically bypass account management to negotiate directly with individual consultants." "It's unusual," I agreed, "but not unprecedented. They have specific requirements for how this project needs to be structured, and they wanted to understand if those requirements could be met." He turned back to face me. "What kind of requirements?" This was where things got dangerous. I knew that Marcus would interpret any arrangement that gave me direct authority as a threat to his own position and influence. They want the project lead to have decision-making authority over implementation details, without requiring approval from intermediate management layers. They feel that the innovative nature of the approach requires that level of autonomy. Marcus's expression darkened. "Absolutely not. That's not how Meridian operates. Every project goes through proper oversight channels. That's how we ensure quality control and client satisfaction." "Marcus, this is a $2.3 million contract. If we can structure it in a way that meets their requirements while maintaining Meridian standards, isn't that worth exploring?" "What you're describing isn't a consulting arrangement, Sarah. It's freelancing with corporate backing. If Dataflow wants that kind of relationship, they can hire independent contractors. They don't need Meridian at all." The threat was implicit but clear. Pursue this arrangement, and you'll be doing it without the firm's support. I'd seen Marcus make similar ultimatums before, usually successfully. Most consultants weren't willing to risk their careers on a single client relationship, no matter how promising. But as I sat in his office, looking at his carefully curated symbols of corporate success, I realized something had changed in me since yesterday's presentation. For the first time in my career, I'd experienced what it felt like to have clients genuinely excited about my work, not just politely interested. I'd seen the spark in Patricia Hendricks's eyes when she understood the implications of my adaptive resilience architecture. I'd felt the satisfaction of presenting a solution that I knew could transform their business. "Marcus," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "what if I could structure this in a way that gives Dataflow the autonomy they want while maintaining Meridian's oversight and quality standards?" "How?" "A hybrid model. I remain a Meridian employee, but I function as their embedded strategic partner for the project duration. All deliverables still go through Meridian's review process, but day-to-day implementation decisions rest with me. Think of it as an extended secondment with enhanced authority." Marcus considered this for a long moment. I could see him weighing the risks and benefits, calculating how this arrangement would impact his own position and reputation. "Even if that were possible," he said finally, "there's still the question of whether your approach will actually work. Sarah, you're asking me to stake my reputation on a methodology that's never been tested in a real-world environment. Every breakthrough starts with someone willing to test and improve an approach. And every career ends with someone who bet on the wrong innovation." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, circling through the same arguments and objections. Marcus wasn't willing to support an arrangement that diminished his oversight authority. I wasn't willing to abandon an opportunity that could define my career. We were at an impasse. Finally, Marcus leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. If you want to pursue this arrangement with Dataflow, you're going to do it without my endorsement. I can't stop you from having conversations with clients, but I won't authorize a project structure that undermines Meridian's established processes." "I understand." "Do you? Because once you go down this path, there's no going back. If this project fails, if your methodology doesn't deliver the promised results, your career at this firm is over. Is one client worth that risk?" I stood up, gathering my notes and preparing to leave his office. "Marcus, yesterday you told me not to waste your time with my ideas. Today, those ideas represent a $2.3 million opportunity. Maybe the question isn't whether this client is worth the risk. Maybe it's whether I'm worth the investment." As I walked back to my desk, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. I'd just essentially told my VP that I was going to pursue a major client against his wishes. In the corporate world, that kind of insubordination was usually a career-ending move. But as I thought about Patricia Hendricks's enthusiasm, about the potential impact of my adaptive resilience architecture, about the possibility of finally proving that my 8 years of dedication could produce breakthrough results, I realized that I was more excited than afraid. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Sarah, this is Patricia. Have you had a chance to discuss our arrangement with your management team? We're eager to move forward." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed my response. "Patricia, let's schedule a call for this afternoon. I have some ideas about how we can make this work." Thursday morning brought the kind of gray, drizzling weather that makes Manhattan feel claustrophobic. But I barely noticed as I walked the 12 blocks from my Upper East Side apartment to Meridian's offices. I had spent most of the previous evening on the phone with Patricia Hendricks, Michael Torres, and Jennifer Walsh, working out the details of an arrangement that would satisfy their requirements while keeping me technically within Meridian's employment structure. The solution we'd crafted was elegant in its simplicity. Dataflow would contract with Meridian for my services as a dedicated strategic implementation partner, with the unusual provision that all project decisions would be made by me in consultation with their executive team, bypassing traditional account management oversight. Meridian would receive their standard consulting fees, but I would function with unprecedented autonomy. Marcus had made it clear that he wouldn't actively support this arrangement, but he also hadn't forbidden it. In the complex world of corporate politics, that constituted grudging permission. I had spent 8 years learning to read the subtle signals of institutional approval and disapproval, and I understood that I was operating in a gray area that could either launch my career or destroy it. The Meridian offices were buzzing with their usual morning energy as I made my way to the consulting division on the 42nd floor. I had barely settled at my desk when James Morrison appeared, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Sarah, can we talk?" he asked, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. I followed him to one of the small meeting rooms used for confidential conversations. James closed the door and leaned against it, as if he were blocking potential eavesdroppers. "I heard about your call with Data Flow," he began. "About the special arrangement." Word traveled fast in consulting firms. I wasn't surprised that James had heard, but I was curious about his source. "What exactly did you hear?" "That they want you to lead the implementation, personally. That Marcus isn't happy about it. That this could either make your career or end it." I studied his face, trying to understand his motivation for this conversation. James and I had never been particularly close, but we'd maintained a professional relationship based on mutual respect for each other's abilities. "James, if you're worried about competition for future projects, I don't think this changes anything. One successful engagement doesn't shift the entire landscape." He shook his head. "That's not what this is about. Sarah, I want you to succeed. Your presentation yesterday was brilliant, genuinely innovative. But I'm worried that you're walking into a political minefield without understanding the risks." "What do you mean?" James sat down across from me, his expression serious. "Marcus isn't just annoyed about being bypassed. He's actively working to undermine this arrangement. I overheard him on a call with senior management this morning, expressing concerns about setting dangerous precedents and compromising quality control standards." My stomach clenched. I'd expected Marcus to be unhappy, but I hadn't anticipated active sabotage. "What kind of concerns?" "He's positioning this as a case study in why individual consultants shouldn't have unsupervised client relationships. He's arguing that if this arrangement fails, it could damage Meridian's reputation with other clients who might demand similar autonomy." The implications were clear. Marcus wasn't just protecting his own authority. He was building a case for why my arrangement with Data Flow represented a broader threat to the firm's business model. If he could frame my project as an institutional risk rather than a personal power struggle, he'd have much more support from senior management. "James, why are you telling me this?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I've seen what happens when politics trumps performance in this business. I've watched good consultants get marginalized because they threaten the wrong people. And honestly, your proposal yesterday was better than mine. If innovation is going to be punished instead of rewarded, we're all in the wrong business." The rest of Thursday passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I spent the morning finalizing the contractual details with Data Flow's legal team, working through the implementation timeline, and preparing for what I knew would be the most important project of my career. But underneath the excitement was a growing awareness that I was operating without institutional support, perhaps even with institutional opposition. At 2 p.m., I received an email from Marcus requesting my presence at a meeting with senior management Friday morning. The subject line read, "Project Structure Review, Data Flow Engagement." The language was bureaucratic, but the message was clear. I was being called to account for my arrangement. Friday morning's meeting took place in the executive conference room on the 45th floor, a space I'd only been in twice during my 8 years at Meridian. The room was designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Manhattan, a table that could seat 20 people, portraits of the firm's founding partners lining the walls. Present were Marcus, Senior Vice President Catherine Mills, and Managing Director Robert Chin. No relation, despite the shared surname. Catherine was a woman in her early 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for making decisions based on data rather than politics. Robert was younger, perhaps 50, with the kind of aggressive energy that had built Meridian into one of New York's premier consulting firms. Marcus began with a summary of the data flow situation, carefully framing my arrangement as a deviation from established protocols that could set dangerous precedents for client relationships. His presentation was polished and persuasive, hitting all the right notes about quality control, oversight responsibilities, and institutional risk management. When he finished, Catherine turned to me. "Sarah, we'd like to hear your perspective on this arrangement. Specifically, how you see this fitting within Meridian's existing service delivery model." This was my moment. I'd spent the previous evening preparing for exactly this question, crafting an argument that would position my arrangement as an evolution of Meridian's capabilities rather than a departure from them. "Catherine, Robert, thank you for taking the time to review this situation. I want to start by acknowledging that this arrangement is unusual, but I believe it represents an opportunity for Meridian to differentiate itself in an increasingly competitive marketplace." I clicked to my first slide, a comparison chart showing traditional consulting models versus what I was calling embedded strategic partnership. The consulting industry is evolving. Clients are demanding more than analysis and recommendations. They want implementation partners who can deliver measurable results. Data flow's requirements aren't anomalous. They're indicative of where the market is heading. Robert leaned forward. "That's an interesting thesis, but how do we maintain quality control without traditional oversight mechanisms?" "By redefining oversight," I replied, clicking to my next slide. "Instead of process-based oversight, we implement outcome-based accountability. I provide weekly progress reports, monthly performance metrics, and quarterly strategic reviews. Data flow's satisfaction becomes the primary measure of project success, but Meridian maintains visibility into all deliverables and methodologies." For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through the financial implications: higher profit margins due to reduced management overhead, the competitive advantages, differentiated service offerings that competitors couldn't match, and the risk mitigation strategies, clear performance metrics, and defined failure criteria. When I finished, the room was quiet. Catherine made notes on a legal pad while Robert stared out the window, apparently deep in thought. Marcus watched both of them, trying to read their reactions. Finally, Robert spoke. "Sarah, this is either brilliant or catastrophic. The upside potential is significant, but so is the downside risk. If this fails, it doesn't just impact your career. It impacts Meridian's reputation and our ability to secure similar high-value contracts in the future." "I understand that, Robert. That's why I've built extensive safeguards into the project structure. Clear milestones, measurable outcomes, and defined exit criteria if performance doesn't meet expectations." Catherine looked up from her notes. "What happens if Dataflow decides they want this arrangement to become the standard for all their consulting relationships? Or worse, what happens if other clients demand similar autonomy based on the precedent we're setting here?" This was the question I'd been dreading, the one that went to the heart of Marcus's concerns about institutional risk. "Catherine, I think we're looking at this backwards. Instead of viewing client demands for autonomy as a threat, we should see them as market intelligence. If multiple clients want embedded partnerships rather than traditional consulting, that tells us something important about industry evolution." Marcus couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Sarah, you're talking about fundamentally changing how this firm operates based on one client's unusual requirements. That's not evolution. It's reckless experimentation." "Marcus," I replied, keeping my voice level. 3 years ago, this firm started offering digital transformation services because clients demanded capabilities we didn't traditionally provide. 2 years ago, we launched our data analytics practice for the same reason. Meridian has always evolved to meet client needs. This is just the next step in that evolution. Robert stood up and walked to the window, his back to the room. "How confident are you in your methodology, Sarah? Not confident that it might work, but confident that it will work." The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was the moment where corporate speak and diplomatic hedging would be fatal. Robert was asking me to stake my professional reputation on an untested approach, and he wanted an honest answer. Robert, I'm confident enough to bet my career on it. The analysis is solid, the methodology is sound, and the projected outcomes are conservative estimates based on rigorous modeling. But more importantly, I'm confident because I've seen the spark in their eyes when they understood what this system could do for their business. That's not polite interest. That's genuine excitement from people who know their industry inside and out. The room fell silent again. I could hear the muffled sounds of traffic 45 floors below, the distant hum of air conditioning, the scratch of Catherine's pen as she continued making notes. Finally, Catherine looked up. Sarah, if we approve this arrangement, you understand that failure isn't an option. Not just for you, but for the concept of embedded partnerships as a service offering. I understand. Robert turned back to the room. Marcus, what's your honest assessment of Sarah's track record here at Meridian? Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. His personal feelings about the data flow arrangement were at odds with my objective performance history, and everyone in the room knew it. Sarah has been a solid contributor, he said finally. Her analytical skills are strong. Her client relationships have been positive, and she's consistently met her billing targets. That's not what I asked, Robert pressed. I asked for your honest assessment. In your professional opinion, is Sarah capable of delivering on the promises she's made to Dataflow? Another pause. I held my breath, knowing that Marcus's answer could determine not just the fate of this project, but my entire future at Meridian. Yes, he said finally. I believe she has the technical capabilities to execute her proposed methodology. My concerns are about the precedent and the oversight structure, not about her competence. Catherine closed her notepad and looked at each of us in turn. Here's what's going to happen. Sarah, you have our conditional approval for this arrangement, conditional on several non-negotiable requirements. My heart hammered against my ribs. What requirements? First, you'll provide weekly written reports to Marcus, regardless of Dataflow's preferences for direct communication. Second, any methodology changes or scope adjustments must be approved by this office before implementation. Third, we're establishing a 90-day performance review. If Dataflow isn't completely satisfied with progress at that point, we revert to traditional project management. And fourth, Robert added, if this works, you're going to help us develop embedded partnership as a formal service offering. If it fails, you'll help us understand why, so we don't repeat the mistake. I nodded, trying to process the reality that I'd just received approval for the most important project of my career. I understand. Thank you for this opportunity. As we filed out of the conference room, Marcus fell into step beside me. Sarah, I want you to know that despite my reservations about this arrangement, I'm rooting for your success. Meridian succeeds when our consultants succeed. I appreciate that, Marcus, and I want you to know that I understand the risks you're taking by supporting this, even conditionally. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. I worked with Dataflow's IT team to establish the data integration systems my methodology required. I collaborated with their operations managers to map existing workflows and identify integration points for the new architecture. I spent hours in meetings with Patricia, Michael, and Jennifer, refining the implementation timeline and establishing success metrics. But it was a conversation with Jennifer Walsh that gave me the deepest insight into why Dataflow had been willing to take such an unusual approach to this engagement. We were sitting in her office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, reviewing warehouse efficiency data, when she suddenly leaned back in her chair and studied me with the same intensity she'd shown during my initial presentation. Sarah, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why did you become a consultant? The question caught me off guard. I'm not sure I understand. Most people in this business are either trying to make a lot of money quickly or they're using consulting as a stepping stone to something else. You don't strike me as either type. You seem genuinely passionate about solving complex problems. I thought about her observation for a moment. I became a consultant because I wanted to work on challenges that mattered, problems that couldn't be solved with standard approaches or conventional thinking. I wanted to be part of making things better, not just more profitable. Jennifer nodded. That's what I thought, and that's why we were willing to structure this arrangement the way we did. Sarah, we've worked with a lot of consulting firms over the years. Most of them send us smart people who apply proven methodologies to produce predictable results. That's fine for incremental improvements, but it's not what we needed for this challenge. What did you need? We needed someone who was more interested in solving our problem than in protecting their own position. Someone who was willing to stake their reputation on an innovative approach rather than playing it safe with conventional wisdom. She paused, looking out her office window at the data flow warehouse complex spreading across several acres of New Jersey industrial landscape. Do you know what convinced us that your approach was right? The analysis, the projected outcomes. Jennifer shook her head. It was watching your face when that VP dismissed your ideas. Most consultants would have backed down, tried to find a middle ground that wouldn't offend anyone. You looked angry, not hurt, not embarrassed. Angry, like someone who genuinely believed in their solution and was frustrated that politics was getting in the way of progress. I was angry, I admitted. Good. Because what we're trying to do here requires that kind of conviction. We're not just optimizing our supply chain. We're reimagining how logistics can work in an increasingly unpredictable world. That requires someone who's willing to fight for their ideas, not just present them politely. 3 weeks into the implementation, I was working 16-hour days and loving every minute of it. The adaptive resilience architecture was more complex to implement than even I had anticipated, requiring integration with systems and processes that hadn't been designed to work together. But every challenge we solved revealed new possibilities, new ways the system could deliver value beyond our original projections. My weekly reports to Marcus had evolved from perfunctory updates to detailed case studies in innovation management. Despite his initial skepticism, I could tell he was genuinely impressed by the progress we were making. More importantly, Dataflow's operations metrics were already showing improvements, even though we were only partially through the implementation. It was on a Thursday evening in late November that everything changed. I was in Dataflow's main conference room with Patricia, Michael, Jennifer, and their head of operations, reviewing the preliminary results from our first full system test. The numbers were extraordinary. A 22% reduction in average delivery times, a 31% decrease in weather-related delays, and a 47% improvement in the system's ability to automatically reroute shipments around unexpected obstacles. These results are incredible, Michael said, studying the performance dashboard we'd built to track system effectiveness. But I have to ask, are they sustainable? Can the system maintain this level of performance as we scale up to full implementation? Not only can it maintain performance, I replied, clicking to the next slide in my presentation, but it actually improves as it scales. The more data the system processes, the more accurate its predictive models become. The more disruptions it encounters, the better it gets at turning those disruptions into competitive advantages. Patricia leaned forward in her chair. Sarah, I want to understand something. When you first presented this approach, you were confident but realistic about the projected outcomes. These results exceed your initial projections by significant margins. Did you underestimate the system's potential, or are we seeing performance anomalies that might normalize over time? It was a fair question, and one that I'd been grappling with myself. The system was performing better than my models had predicted, consistently and across multiple operational metrics. Patricia, I think what we're seeing is the difference between theoretical optimization and practical optimization. My initial projections were based on mathematical models of how the system should perform under ideal conditions. But real-world implementation revealed optimization opportunities that couldn't be captured in theoretical analysis. Jennifer spoke up. Can you give us an example? Absolutely. One of our biggest early wins came from something we never anticipated: driver behavior adaptation. The system's real-time routing recommendations were so consistently accurate that our delivery drivers started trusting them implicitly, even when the recommended routes seemed counterintuitive. That trust led to faster decision-making, reduced hesitation at route decision points, and ultimately, faster overall delivery times. You're saying the system got better because people started believing in it. I'm saying the system got better because it proved itself reliable enough that people stopped second-guessing it. In traditional supply chain optimization, there's always a tension between automated recommendations and human judgment. Our system eliminated that tension by being consistently right. The meeting continued for another hour, diving deep into technical details and discussing the implications for full-scale rollout. But as we wrapped up and prepared to leave, Patricia asked me to stay behind for a private conversation. Sarah, I want to talk to you about something sensitive. We've been so focused on the technical aspects of this implementation that we haven't discussed the business implications for your relationship with Meridian. I felt my stomach tighten. What do you mean? This project is going to be a case study in successful innovation for years to come. The results you've delivered are going to attract attention from other companies, other consulting firms, and probably business schools. That level of visibility comes with opportunities and risks. What kind of risks? Patricia walked to the conference room window, looking out at the warehouse complex that was now running more efficiently than anyone had thought possible. The risk that Meridian will want to take credit for innovations that were primarily your work. The risk that you'll be pressured to share your methodology with competitors. The risk that your success will be used to justify changes in consulting practices that you don't agree with. She turned back to face me. Sarah, I want you to know that Dataflow values our partnership with you personally, not just with Meridian as an institution. If you ever decide you want to explore different professional arrangements, we'd be very interested in discussing long-term strategic partnerships. The implication was clear but diplomatically expressed. Dataflow was suggesting that they'd be willing to work with me directly if I ever decided to leave Meridian. It was the kind of career-defining opportunity that most consultants only dream about, a major client essentially offering to fund my independence. Patricia, I appreciate that more than I can express. Right now, I'm focused on delivering the best possible results for this project. But it's good to know that you see value in our working relationship beyond the current engagement. As I drove back to Manhattan through the Lincoln Tunnel that evening, I found myself thinking about Jennifer's earlier observation about conviction and commitment. 3 months ago, I'd been a competent but unremarkable consultant working on incremental improvements to established systems. Tonight, I was driving home from a meeting where a Fortune 500 CEO had essentially offered to fund my entrepreneurial independence. The transformation hadn't happened because of luck or connections or corporate politics. It had happened because I'd been willing to stake my reputation on an innovative solution, even when institutional authority opposed it. More importantly, it had happened because I'd found clients who valued innovation more than conformity, results more than process. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Sarah, saw your weekly report. Exceptional work. Let's discuss next steps tomorrow morning. For the first time since this project began, Marcus's message sounded like genuine enthusiasm rather than grudging acceptance. Maybe he was finally seeing what I'd seen from the beginning. That Dataflow hadn't been asking for special treatment. They'd been asking for the future of consulting. The December morning, when everything crystallized, was one of those perfect New York winter days when the city feels sharp and alive with possibility. I arrived at Meridian's offices early, as had become my habit during the Dataflow implementation. But instead of heading straight to my desk, I stopped by the 45th floor executive suite. Catherine Mills was already in her office, reviewing reports with her characteristic intensity. When I knocked on her open door, she looked up with the kind of smile that told me she'd been expecting this conversation. "Sarah, come in. I assume you're here about the data flow results." "I am." "Catherine, we need to talk about what comes next." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I was hoping you'd say that. Sarah, your project has generated more internal discussion than any engagement I've seen in my 12 years with this firm. The results speak for themselves, but more importantly, the methodology you've developed represents a fundamental shift in how we think about client relationships." I settled into the chair, trying to read her expression. "What kind of discussion?" "The good kind. Robert has been fielding calls from other clients who want to understand if we can provide similar embedded partnerships for their strategic initiatives. Marcus has been researching how we could scale your approach across the consulting division. And I've been working with our business development team to understand the market implications of positioning Meridian as the leader in strategic implementation partnerships." The magnitude of what she was describing hit me like a wave. "Catherine, are you saying that data flow wasn't just a one-off arrangement? That this could become a core service offering?" "I'm saying that you've accidentally created what might be the most significant innovation in consulting methodology that this firm has ever developed. The question is, what do we do with that innovation?" Before I could respond, her phone buzzed with an intercom call. "Ms. Mills, Robert Chin, and Marcus Whitfield are here for your 9 o'clock meeting." Catherine smiled. "Perfect timing. Sarah, I hope you don't mind, but I asked them to join us for this conversation. What we're discussing affects all of us." Robert and Marcus entered together, their expressions suggesting they'd been deep in conversation before arriving. Robert looked energized, the way he always did when he sensed major business opportunities. Marcus looked thoughtful, perhaps even slightly amazed. "Sarah," Robert began, settling into the chair beside me, "congratulations. The data flow results are extraordinary, but more importantly, the strategic implications are game-changing." "Thank you. But I have to ask, what strategic implications?" Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Sarah, in the past 6 weeks, we've received inquiries from 8 different companies asking if Meridian offers embedded strategic partnerships. Not traditional consulting, not project-based engagements, but specifically the kind of long-term, high-autonomy arrangement you developed with Dataflow." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 8 companies, without any marketing or business development efforts on Meridian's part, had independently concluded that they wanted the same kind of partnership that Dataflow had negotiated. Catherine opened a folder on her desk. "Here's what's more interesting. These aren't small companies looking for bargain consulting. This list includes 2 Fortune 100 corporations, 3 major technology firms, and several mid-market companies in highly competitive industries. They're specifically asking for strategic partners who can deliver innovation, not just analysis." Robert stood up and walked to the whiteboard mounted on Catherine's office wall. "Sarah, I want to walk you through what we think is happening here." He drew a simple diagram: traditional consulting on the left, embedded partnerships on the right, with a timeline arrow connecting them. Traditional consulting worked perfectly when business environments were stable and predictable. Companies could hire experts to analyze their situations, recommend improvements, and then implement those recommendations using internal resources. But that model breaks down when change happens faster than internal capabilities can adapt. He added more details to the diagram. Embedded partnerships work better in dynamic environments because the strategic expertise stays connected to the implementation reality. Instead of handing off recommendations and walking away, the strategist remains engaged throughout the execution, adapting the approach as conditions change. Marcus nodded. "What you developed with Dataflow wasn't just a creative response to their unusual requirements. It was an early example of what consulting needs to become to remain relevant in increasingly volatile business environments. I stared at the whiteboard, trying to process the idea that my arrangement with Dataflow might represent the future of the entire consulting industry. But that assumes companies are willing to pay premium fees for long-term strategic partnerships instead of project-based engagements. "Sarah," Catherine said, opening another folder, "let me show you something that will change your perspective on pricing." She handed me a spreadsheet comparing the financial performance of traditional consulting engagements versus the Dataflow embedded partnership. The numbers were staggering. The embedded partnership generated nearly 3 times the revenue per hour while requiring significantly less overhead and administrative support. How is that possible? Robert returned to his seat. Because embedded partnerships eliminate the inefficiencies of traditional consulting. No time wasted on knowledge transfer between teams. No delays while clients evaluate recommendations. No miscommunication between strategists and implementers. The client pays more per hour, but they get dramatically better results per dollar invested. The conversation continued for another hour, exploring the operational challenges of scaling embedded partnerships, the staffing requirements, the training implications, and the competitive advantages this approach could provide. But underneath all the strategic discussion, I found myself grappling with a more personal question. What did this mean for my career? Finally, Catherine addressed the question I'd been afraid to ask. "Sarah, we want to offer you a position leading the development of our embedded partnership practice. It would be a significant promotion with compensation and authority commensurate with the revenue potential we're discussing." The offer was everything I'd worked toward during my 8 years at Meridian: recognition, advancement, financial reward, and the opportunity to shape the direction of the firm's services. But as I sat in Catherine's office, looking at the faces of colleagues who'd gone from skeptical opposition to enthusiastic support, I realized that my perspective on career success had changed during the Dataflow implementation. "I'm honored by that offer," I said carefully. "But before I respond, I need to understand something. Would this position give me the authority to maintain the same kind of direct client relationships that made the Dataflow project successful?" Marcus answered before Catherine could respond. "Sarah, that's exactly what this position would require. We can't scale embedded partnerships using traditional account management structures. The practice leader would need to function as the primary relationship owner for major embedded partnership clients, and the authority to make strategic decisions without intermediate approval." Robert smiled. "Sarah, we're not just offering you authority over strategic decisions. We're offering you authority over the strategic direction of what could become Meridian's most profitable practice area." That afternoon, I found myself back in Dataflow's offices for what had become our regular Thursday progress review. The warehouse complex was humming with activity, but it was a different kind of activity than I'd observed during my first visit 3 months earlier. Instead of the controlled chaos of a system under stress, there was a sense of smooth efficiency, of processes working exactly as they were designed to work. Patricia, Michael, and Jennifer were waiting in the main conference room, along with several operations managers I'd worked with during the implementation. The weekly reviews had evolved from status updates to strategic planning sessions, discussions about how to leverage the success of the adaptive resilience architecture to tackle other operational challenges. "Sarah," Patricia began, "we want to discuss the next phase of our partnership." "Next phase?" Michael opened his laptop and connected it to the conference room's presentation system. "The supply chain optimization has exceeded every expectation we had, but the success of that project has highlighted opportunities for similar approaches in other areas of our business." The screen filled with a comprehensive analysis of Dataflow's operations, showing potential applications for adaptive resilience architecture in inventory management, customer service, and even financial planning. Jennifer leaned forward in her chair. "Sarah, we don't want this to be a consulting engagement that ends when the current project is complete. We want you to be our long-term strategic partner, helping us transform every aspect of our business that could benefit from innovative approaches. The scale of what they were proposing was breathtaking, not just a contract extension, but a comprehensive partnership that could span years and touch every aspect of Dataflow's operations. Patricia continued, "We've prepared a proposal for what we're calling a strategic innovation partnership. It would be structured as a multi-year arrangement with Meridian, but with you maintaining direct authority over all strategic decisions and implementation approaches." She handed me a bound document that was significantly thicker than typical consulting contracts. The financial terms are substantial, but more importantly, the arrangement would give you resources to develop and test innovative methodologies that could benefit not just Dataflow, but the broader logistics industry. As I flipped through the proposal, I found myself thinking about the conversation I'd had that morning with Catherine, Robert, and Marcus. Both Meridian and Dataflow were offering me opportunities to transform my career, but in very different directions. Meridian was offering corporate advancement, institutional resources, and the chance to shape consulting industry practices. Dataflow was offering entrepreneurial freedom, innovation resources, and the chance to revolutionize logistics industry practices. Patricia, this proposal is incredibly generous, but I need to understand something. Are you asking me to choose between my relationship with Meridian and my partnership with Dataflow? Not at all, she replied. We want to work with Meridian as the institutional framework for our partnership, but we want to work with you as the strategic leader who has authority over how that partnership develops. Michael added, think of it as the Dataflow arrangement scaled up to institutional level. Meridian provides the corporate infrastructure, you provide the strategic leadership, and Dataflow provides the business challenges that drive innovation. The elegance of the arrangement was compelling. I could accept Meridian's offer to lead their embedded partnership practice while maintaining my direct relationship with Dataflow as the flagship client for that practice. Instead of choosing between corporate advancement and entrepreneurial freedom, I could have both. But as I sat in that conference room, looking at the faces of executives who'd become genuine partners over the past 3 months, I realized that the most important decision I faced wasn't about career advancement or financial opportunity. It was about what kind of professional I wanted to become. 3 months ago, I'd been a competent consultant focused on delivering quality analysis within established frameworks. The Dataflow project had transformed me into something different, an innovator willing to stake my reputation on unproven approaches, a strategic partner invested in my client's long-term success, and a professional who valued breakthrough results more than institutional approval. Patricia, Michael, Jennifer, I said finally, I want to accept your proposal, but I want to structure it in a way that creates value not just for Dataflow and Meridian, but for the broader business community. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean that the methodologies we've developed together are too valuable to remain proprietary to one company or one consulting firm. What if we structured our strategic innovation partnership to include knowledge-sharing components, case studies, methodology documentation, industry conferences where other companies could learn from our successes and failures? Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that told me I had just proposed exactly what she'd been hoping to hear. Sarah, that's brilliant. Instead of just transforming Dataflow, we transform the entire logistics industry. Instead of just advancing your career, we advance the entire consulting profession. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, refining the details of an arrangement that would position me at the center of industry transformation while maintaining my relationships with both Dataflow and Meridian. By the time we finished, I had commitments for resources, authority, and support that exceeded anything I'd imagined when I first walked into conference room C with my simple black binder. As I drove back to Manhattan that evening, I found myself thinking about Marcus's dismissive comment that had started this entire journey. Don't waste our time with your ideas. The irony was almost overwhelming. Those ideas had become the foundation for what might be the most significant innovation in consulting methodology in decades. But the real transformation hadn't been in the ideas themselves. It had been in my willingness to fight for those ideas, to stake my professional reputation on approaches that institutional authority didn't understand or support. The difference between competent consulting and breakthrough innovation wasn't technical expertise or analytical ability. It was conviction. My phone rang as I entered the Lincoln Tunnel. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. "Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting your drive home." "Not at all. What's up?" "I wanted to give you a heads up about something. I just got off a call with a reporter from Harvard Business Review. They want to do a feature story about embedded partnerships and the data flow case study. Apparently, word has gotten out about the results you've delivered, and there's significant interest in understanding how the methodology works." I felt my stomach tighten. What kind of feature story? The good kind. They want to position it as a case study in successful innovation, with focus on how challenging conventional wisdom can lead to breakthrough results. "Sarah, this kind of publicity could establish you as a thought leader in strategic consulting." As I emerged from the tunnel into Manhattan, the city lights reflecting off the East River, I realized that the conversation I'd had with Patricia about industry transformation was already beginning. The ideas that had started as a desperate attempt to win a single client engagement were becoming the foundation for broader professional recognition and industry influence. "Marcus, that sounds like an incredible opportunity. But before I commit to any interviews, I want to make sure that data flow is comfortable with the public attention this might generate." Already handled. Patricia Hendricks specifically requested that any media coverage include data flow's perspective on the partnership. She wants to be positioned as a forward-thinking CEO who recognized the value of innovative approaches. 6 months ago, I'd been struggling to get noticed within my own consulting firm. Tonight, I was being courted by Harvard Business Review as a thought leader in industry transformation. The change hadn't happened because of luck or connections or political maneuvering. It had happened because I'd been willing to bet my career on the conviction that my ideas were worth fighting for. As I parked in my apartment building's garage and prepared to walk upstairs to my one-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side, I realized that the most important validation hadn't come from Harvard Business Review or senior management at Meridian or even the exceptional results at Dataflow. The most important validation had come from that moment in conference room C, when I had looked at Patricia Hendricks and realized that she understood the value of what I was proposing. That moment when a successful CEO had leaned forward in her chair and asked, "How soon could you begin implementation?" That was the moment when I discovered what it felt like to have my ideas taken seriously by people who mattered. That was the moment when I'd realized that the biggest risk in my career wasn't proposing innovative solutions that might fail. The biggest risk was accepting conventional limitations that guaranteed I'd never discover what I was truly capable of achieving. As I rode the elevator up to my apartment, I thought about Marcus's dismissive comment one more time. "Don't waste our time with your ideas." Looking back, I realized that had been the most valuable advice anyone had ever given me. Not because it was correct, but because it had forced me to prove how wrong it was.